This is the Bobby Ho Show, and this season of episodes features interviews from my new project called We Are Boss People. We Are Boss People is all about the new success, authentic and unapologetic. Stories of transitions, unique journeys, setbacks, and triumphs. For more, including the interview from this episode, please visit wearebosspeople.com. This episode features a dialogue with Rev Daryl Williams. Daryl's story takes us from Brooklyn to Morehouse to a career in banking to a good talk with his barber to Houston, Seattle, Missouri, Yale University, and finally to Maryland, where he lives with his wife and son. Reverend Daryl is the senior pastor of the St. Paul United Methodist Church of Oxon Hill, Maryland. I hope you enjoy hearing about how his community gives him hope in humanity in the age of Corona. Go. Hi, welcome to We Are Boss People. This is a dialogue with Reverend Daryl. He is a friend from high school. It's the first time that I'm seeing him, even though it's through a screen, in over 25 years, something like that. We're talking about Reverend Daryl's journey from Brooklyn to the world of banking to now being a pastor in Maryland. So good to see you, Daryl.
Good to see you, Rob.
Your family's good?
Everybody's doing well. I mean, strange times we're living in, but we're doing well in the middle of it.
Do you expect your 3-year-old to pop up again, or is he down?
It's hard to say. It's 9:30. I'm figuring I got 2.5 solid hours, but you never know.
You never know. So again, I wanted to reach out to you because I found, your journey really, really interesting. Why don't you just start it off, kick it off, tell us, what you're doing, where you're at, where you live, a little bit about your church and how you got there.
Okay, that's easy enough. I'm Daryl Williams. I am the senior pastor of the St. Paul Church in Oxon Hill, Maryland. Originally a Brooklyn kid, as you said, grew up in the city. You and I met in high school at the prestigious Stuyvesant High School, where we were, thrust into math and science and played football together and all the rest of that stuff. And, when you graduate from Stuyvesant, you typically go to college. I did. I went to Morehouse College in Atlanta, where after, I loved math and science until I had it forced down my throat for 4 years straight. So I went to college. I went to a liberal arts college. I went to Morehouse College in Atlanta and promptly majored in philosophy and religion because that's what you do after you've spent 4 years in Stuyvesant doing math and science.
Right. Did you go into Morehouse knowing what you have any idea what you wanted to study or?
Okay, well, that makes this even more bizarre if you really want to get down to it. Growing up in New York, you get just a lot of weird opportunities. So I started interning at an investment bank when we were in high school. And I wanted to be an investment banker. That's what I went to college to do. My original major when I went to Morehouse was economics. And suffice it to say, in my first economics class, my professor and I did not get along. And I realized that I was going to have to take him way too many times, and this was just not going to work. So I was going to move over to being a business major, and I asked some of my mentors at the bank what I should major in. Should I major in finance? Should I major in general business? And they gave me what was weird at the time, but the best advice ever. They said, you're in college for 4 years. Study something you find interesting that you won't get a chance to study again.
And that was from one of the senior bankers?
That was from one of the senior bankers. They said, listen, the stuff that you need to know here, we will teach you during training, and we already know you can do because you've been here for a while. Study something you'll enjoy because you won't get that opportunity again. And anyway, you'll probably go get an MBA afterwards, so you'll get all the business you want to know then. And I took that to heart and enjoyed this philosophy class once and just kind of majored in philosophy and religion. No intentions of going into ministry. I was going back to Wall Street. And when I graduated from school, that's exactly what I did. I went back to Wall Street at what used to be Payne Weber Incorporated and went into investment banking and was enjoying it. Things were going well until one day I had this level of uneasiness is the only way to describe it. It's one of those weird things where you're doing well, you're doing what you wanted to do, and you're sitting there and you're like, I don't know if I want to do this for the rest of my life.
And how many years in was that?
2 years in. 2 years in. But I had been interning there every summer and during breaks. So my first couple years in investment banking were really weird because I had been doing the same kind of work for so long already. And I had gotten to watch the career path of others, I guess is the best way to put it. I had made some really good friend tours is what I would call it, because they were friends, but they were also mentors because they were significantly older than, well, what seemed significant at the time. I mean, you're talking about people who, the younger people were, maybe 5 or 6 years older than us because, they were fresh out of college and had started in banking. And, some vice presidents and upper level people took an interest in me and took me under their wings. And I kind of looked at the whole path,
Right.
from that first analyst job to associate to AVP to VP to first VP to managing director. And I was able to see that over a real course of time. And I guess when I kind of started realizing it wasn't necessarily what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, and when you're in your early 20s, the rest of your life just seems so long and like this big thing that you got to plan out, which, I don't think you have to plan it out, but when you've got a certain background, you find yourself on a path and you sort of say, okay, this is the path, this is where it goes, these are the things that I have to do to get to where I'm trying to go because I know what the end is. And I kind of looked at some of these folk and they had great lives, but they didn't have lives that I wanted because they made plenty of money. I mean, Wall Street's a great place to make money. It's not a great place to make money and see your family simultaneously. Those two things don't happen.
Yeah, I heard one quote where an investment banker said he didn't see his kids grow up. He saw them just get longer in their beds because he was just there at night.
Well, you essentially see three things. You see them born, you see their first day of school, and you see them graduate. That's what you're there for. In between, you're kind of financing a great life for everybody that you kind of hang out with for 2 weeks a year on vacation. So I didn't want that. And the other thing I didn't want, and it's weird the things that you begin to realize. I would be commuting like everybody does in New York. And I kind of realized I didn't just want to be some anonymous, wealthy investment banker for the rest in life. If that's how it turned out, it wasn't what I wanted. And the hard part is when you're on a path, you're trying to figure out, well, what do I do if I don't do this? Because I didn't have a backup plan. The backup plan was you do your early years and then you go back to graduate school. So you either get a law degree, you get a business degree, or you kind of go to Harvard and get like a Kennedy School degree with the math option to just sort of continue in these things.
Right. And can I ask you a question? So while this is going on, are you going to church? Are you, did you have a spiritual life, or this was just your kind of?
Well, I grew up in church.
Okay.
I'm a Brooklyn kid, grew up in church, grew up going to church every week with my parents. And, one of the joys of being from New York when you start in investment banking is that you don't have to get an apartment. I made the decision to live at home with my parents because while it took away certain things, it was just so much cheaper. Like just the difference in not having to pay rent was.
So that's great. So you're making late 90s good Wall Street banking money and you're not paying rent.
I'm not paying a stitch of rent. I'm giving my parents, my parents didn't ask me for rent, but I would, I'm there. So let me make sure I'm at least, here, Mom, thanks for ironing my shirts. Please have dinner on me, that sort of thing. So I'm making what is good, not great money, but for the age group, exceptional money. And that's on a path to get to what you think is going to be real money one day. And I'm going to church. Church I grew up in had 2 worship services. So we had church at 8 in the morning and at 11. And my parents always had a rule for me. We go to church. So the thing that they don't tell you in investment banking is they pay you a lot, but they also get every dollar of it out of you in the hours that you work. So my work week started on Sundays. Sundays was when I would go in and sort of start preparing for Mondays or finishing something from Friday. Like Saturday was the day that I was like, I'm not going in. But by Sunday, it was either we're going to finish up something from Friday or we're going to get things in line for Monday. So I would say on average, I would kind of do 4 hours on a Sunday, just prepping for the week to come. And because of that, I would go to church at the early service. I go to the 8 o'clock service. I go have brunch somewhere in the city, hang out for a little while. And then around 6, 5, somewhere between 5 and 6, I kind of we trickle into the office. And I wasn't the only, I wasn't special in doing this. It's what everybody.
Right. That's just the way.
Yeah, that's just the way it is. And it seems normal when that's what everybody's doing.
Right.
So, we kind of trickle into the office 4, 5, 6 in the afternoon on Sundays, and you're at your cube, you're doing some work, and you're just doing what you do. You're doing what you do.
So as you're sort of seeing the path and seeing that this may not be for you, who did you talk to? Or, I mean, was it still the older mentors that you had, or your dad, or who? Because I'm sure in your mind, you say, if I tell someone that I'm not good, they're going to think I'm crazy.
It's weird. The only person I ever talked about it with, and this is the most bizarre thing in the world, was my barber. Like, there was literally no one else to talk to about this, because you've got the American dream on some level. You went to a good high school, you went to a good college, you got a great job. This was the brass ring. And to start saying, yeah, I'm not sure that I want it. My parents aren't interested in hearing that, because like all good parents are like, then what are you going to do?
Right.
And I didn't have an answer. There was no, well, I'm going to, and if I could have given them any answer, it would have been easier that, well, I'm going to go be a dolphin researcher. I mean, whatever it was, I didn't have an answer.
You didn't have anything, just not what you were doing.
I didn't have anything. I just knew that this wasn't going to be it. So what I went with was, well, I'll figure it out after graduate school. I'll either get an MBA or a JD. So I'll use that as kind of this transition lane to do something, to figure out what I want to do. And then for me, it was, well, maybe it'll be a different part of banking. Maybe it'll be the other side. Maybe I'll do corporate finance at a corporation instead of being in municipal finance, or instead of being on a trading floor. Maybe I'll explore some area of business that is related to this, but not this. And the difficulty with that is, as I look back, my thinking was just so narrow. It was sort of I can think outside of this lane, but not outside of this path, is kind of what was going on.
So what got you out of that, I can do these square things within this box sort of thinking?
True story. I was sitting at work. I had moved from banking to trading. So I was sitting on the trading floor. And the difference between banking and trading is that simply the markets aren't open on the weekends, and you get your weekends back, but you start earlier in the day, 5 days a week, and you're there hour and a half, depending on what you need to do after the close. So you may not be there. So you're working essentially the same amount of hours, just not in the same time. Right. One day I'm there, and I stayed extra late because I was just kind of catching up on some paperwork and getting some stuff together for clients. And when you're working on a trading floors are all the same. They're very loud when the market is open, and they're virtually silent after everybody is gone. So it's cold because you've got all the computers, and you have to keep them at a certain temperature, and you have the click of the ticker machine and kind of the hiss of air conditioning. And I was sitting there by myself, and I just kind of felt, I looked around and said, there's got to be more than this. There's just got to be more than this. And a friend of mine, his dad was looking for somebody to run the business operations of his church and community development. And I said, you know what? That could be interesting in this time before I go back to school, because I was still, I'll do business school or law school. And I was like, this would be a great thing to put on the resume. It's diversification, because I'm thinking in terms of how do I make the best case for graduate school admission? So you've got 1 million people that are applying with Wall Street. Well, not 1 million, but I mean, when you work in it, you feel like that's what everybody's applying with. So I was like, this would be a nice differentiator. I'll do, this stint of time in the nonprofit world, which I can add to what I've been doing, and it tells a good story. And, I'll continue with life as I knew it. That friend was in Houston, Texas. So it was when I left New York as a professional. I worked in Houston. And I enjoyed working at a church.
Wait, so let me take a step back. So this opportunity wasn't even in Brooklyn for you to go work at a church. Pack up, move, go to Houston.
Packed up, moved to Houston, Texas.
So I just have two questions. One, what did your barber say? And what did your dad and your mom say?
My barber was like, man, you're one of the best customers I had, because I'm very just regular appointment. My parents thought I had lost my mind. They thought I had completely lost it, because I wasn't just leaving Wall Street. I was leaving Wall Street. I was moving to Houston, where I didn't know anybody. My friend was in graduate school in New York. So it's one of those, let me make sure I have this straight. Even the person you know isn't going to be living there. You're just going to go do this. I was like, yeah. But I talked to my mentor. My mentor had left the bank that I was working at, was working in another bank. And this is what he said to me. He said, how old are you? I was like, I'm 24. I think I was 24 at the time. He said, well, if it's right, great. If it's wrong, you're young. This is the time to make mistakes, take chances, and you'll recover. He said, if it doesn't work, you'll recover. If it does work, you'll find a new life. To me, I was like, I'm not even 25 yet. Why not? Worst case scenario, I'll join the Peace Corps. Find something else to do as a transit. Like, that was in the back of my mind. Worst case scenario, I will literally join the Peace Corps, do a year somewhere, helping in a village, and I'll apply to grad school. Like, right. It was always and I'll apply to grad school and get back to life.
And you'd already been to Morehouse, so going from Brooklyn to Houston wasn't a huge transition in your mind.
It's interesting. My path has led me all over this country. I tell people all the time, I'm from Brooklyn, but I am a citizen of America. In my time, I've lived born and raised in New York, college in Atlanta, graduate school in Connecticut. I lived in Houston. I lived in Missouri. I live in Maryland now, and I lived on the West Coast in Seattle after that. So I literally lived in every region of the country, which I always say gives me a unique view into the American psyche, because I've seen just about all.
You've seen a lot.
I've seen a lot. So yeah, I had been to Atlanta, but Atlanta and Houston, outside of traffic being similar, they're radically different cities. Like Texas is just different.
Texas is Texas.
Different than small town Texas, but Texas is just different. And Atlanta is the old South. It's Georgia. It's a city in Georgia, but it's Georgia. And Georgia and Texas just aren't the same. So I go to work for my friend's dad, and only time I've ever been fired from a job in my life.
What?
I drive him home one day, and he tells me, and I quote, "You are the worst director of finance I have ever had, but you are the best assistant pastor I've ever had. You're going to seminary."
Wow.
And I did.
That's a beautiful story. Although you were out of a job.
Can't make this stuff up. So he helped me get into seminary, and I did. That fall, within a couple of weeks, I had applied to seminary. That fall, I went to Yale Divinity School and spent 3 amazing years in New Haven, Connecticut, learning and growing and doing other things. But I always say that there's nothing that you go through in life that isn't for a reason. So interestingly enough, while I'm at Yale, I'm also interning for the Director of Economic Development for the city of New Haven. So the investment banking experience is coming in handy while I'm kind of doing this thing. And I sort of said, that's an interesting blend of skill sets to do nonprofit work, but also to be, as a person of faith, working in a faith tradition. So even when I was in seminary, I kind of figured out, okay, I will probably wind up pastoring, but I also had this, I never lost the urge or joy of the work that I did in finance. I just didn't want to just do that. I just didn't want that to. I didn't want that to be the sum total of my existence at the end of the day. So did that, was in that office for 2 years, then I graduated. Graduated from Yale and went to Seattle, Washington, where I was the executive minister at the First AME Church of Seattle, Washington.
And you're about, what, 28 at this time?
26. You know, 26 or 27. So somewhere in that general vicinity. Was out there for 2 years and then got my first senior pastorate in Columbia, Missouri, of all places. Now, to explain Columbia, Missouri to you, I have to explain to you how I used to tell people to come visit me if they wanted to. You fly into either Kansas City or St. Louis. Just pick whichever one is cheaper. If you fly into St. Louis, head west. Once you get out of the city, the next thing you see that looks like civilization will be Columbia, Missouri. If you fly into Kansas City, head east. Once you drive past Arrowhead Stadium, the next sign of civilization you'll see will be Columbia, Missouri. And Columbia is where the University of Missouri is, you know, major land-grant institution. So rural, when I say I've got a different peek into the American psyche, I lived in rural Missouri for 2.5 years.
Now, I'm just curious, how did they receive you? Are you, you know, to them, big city, Brooklyn, Mr. Yale, coming to Missouri, or what was that like?
It's a humbling experience is the best way to describe it. They were great with me. But if you want to talk fish out of water, this story sums it up. I moved to Columbia for good because I was transitioning from Seattle to Columbia in the winter. So I moved there for good right after the first of the year. And it snowed. And as a New Yorker, I was like, okay, well, it's a little snow. I'll go outside. I'll shovel my walk. I'll shovel my driveway. I would shovel it, go back in the house, come back the next day. It had snowed again. This happened for a week until one of my neighbors said, it's going to do this every day. Just drive in and get yourself a path. Because to me, I thought this was God playing a prank on me. Because I'm like, how is this happening every day? One of my neighbors finally said, it's Missouri. It does this every day. You just drive up, you know, you'll have tracks in the snow. Just position your car in them, you'll be fine. And that... It was, you know, Dorothy, you're not in Kansas anymore. Well, Daryl, you're not in Brooklyn anymore.
Right.
More than else. But a great time that I had there serving that church. And while I was there, I also worked for the University of Missouri. So this kind of finance background just kept coming in handy. I worked as a corporate relations officer for the University of Missouri during one of their capital campaigns.
Love it. And so from Missouri, you ended up from there to the DC area?
Ended up from there to the DC area. I was recruited to be the director of investments for the United Methodist Church Foundation for the Baltimore and Washington area. So I wanted to get back to the East Coast. I wanted to be closer to my parents. You know, when you're young, you're like, well, let me get away. As you get older, you're like, I need to be closer. Right. So DC to me was a great compromise of getting back on the East Coast and, you know, an Amtrak away. So it was great. So I came back and I was doing that. I was in charge of investments and planned giving for them and helping people with capital campaigns. Then I became the executive director of that foundation and did that for 4 or 5 years. I don't remember which one. And then I went back to a local church and became pastor again.
And that's what do you love about being a pastor? Is it just encouraging the church? Is it preaching and teaching? Like what motivates you through? I'm sure you know being a pastor isn't easy. What keeps you going?
It is, to be completely honest, it's a calling more than anything else, because regardless of what people have seen on television from time to time, there's not a whole bunch of money in it. There's a whole bunch of stress in it. And, you know, taking care of and leading people in the nonprofit sector is not easy. And it's not easy because when you're working with volunteers, you have the same responsibilities and accountabilities as a CEO, but you have none of the pressure points of a CEO. There is no I'm paying you. There is no you'll lose your job. So it's a soft skill environment that also has a hard skill set behind it. But I love doing it. I love preaching and teaching. I love seeing people's lives change. And I love what a church that is active in its community and wants to make a difference can do. I'll give you an example. Right now, my church is in the DC area. We do this thing called Warm Nights, where they ask churches to become essentially a hypothermia shelter during the winter for a week.
That's amazing.
My church does 2 weeks of it every year now. We started off doing one, now we do two. And right now, literally, there are 22 men in the basement of my church. We've converted the basement of the church for these 2 weeks into, I don't want to call it a makeshift homeless shelter because that makes it sound worse than it is. But essentially, we're housing 22 men during the last week and this week, even with the COVID and all the rest of that. And we've had to do specific things that make it a very different experience this year than it has been to create distance and social distancing and things that we've had to do to keep our volunteers safe. But it's heartening every time I have volunteers that say, listen, yeah, there's a pandemic, but I'm going to donate 2 hours of my time or 3 hours of my time to make sure these people who have literally nothing have something for at least a couple weeks. So when you see the goodness of humanity, and when you have people whose lives literally can be changed by some of the work you do, no matter how hard it is, it makes you say, yeah, I'm coming back tomorrow. And then you add on to that, just as a person of faith, preaching and teaching the word of God is important to me. There is nothing else I'd rather be doing. I always tell people, if there's something else you can do and be happy, do it, because this work is way too hard. But there are plenty of things I do on the side, but this is what I've given my life to.
And sorry, transition to slightly a more personal topic, because I'm curious, when you met your wife, were you already a pastor leading the church? Was that how you two met and started dating?
How I met my wife is an interesting story. I met my wife when I was leading a singles ministry group at a different church, not the church I pastored. I was leading a singles ministry at a different church. And this woman came into the singles group, and, I wasn't some Lothario just trying to I'll run the singles. Great. It wasn't anything like that. We became friends. We just became friends. I become friends with a whole bunch of people through the work of the ministry. I become, friends and acquainted with a whole bunch of people through the work.
And I'm sure you had a bunch of the older women in the church trying to set you up with someone.
Interestingly enough, no. Interestingly enough, times have changed. The older women of the church want to see you get married, but I never had the ones who were sort of like, I have a niece. That I never had that. But the funny thing is, I did, after I got engaged, there were a few who were like, my daughter was always interested. I thought it was hilarious afterwards. And it was one of those, I didn't want to date somebody in a church where I was doing ministry. I just think it's a bad look. But there was just something different about my wife. I said, look, you can't date more than one. But if there's one that I convinced myself, if there's one that's worth the shot, it's her. And we have become such good friends. I enjoyed her company so much. And that's how we met. And this year we'll have been married 7 years.
Oh, congrats. And your son is now 3 years old?
He is 3. He is a happy, healthy 3-year-old toddler that does all the things that happy, healthy 3-year-old toddlers do.
I guess, is he running the house in these days?
He's doing his best. He is the only person who doesn't have anything else to do. So my wife and I are kind of trading off between each other with him. So, both of us spend a lot of time on Zooms right now. So it's one of if I'm not on a Zoom, I'll have him. If she's on a Zoom, if I'm on a Zoom, depending on the Zoom I'm on. Some Zooms, one of the great things about being a pastor is that people kind of get that there are certain peculiarities to how we work and some of the things we have to do. So especially with the kind of self-quarantining of this time. My son joins me on Zoom sometimes because he'll be sitting next to me with my iPad kind of watching something on YouTube, and he'll look up and say, "Oh, hey," and he'll just lean into the picture and wave at people, and they wave back, and he goes back to what he's doing. So
right. I heard your message from this past Sunday online. I listened to it today, so thank you for that. I'm just curious. So what are you telling your congregation these days? Because even with faith, even people who believe, there's still a lot of anxiety and there's still, some worry. So what is your message to your flock?
My message continues to be to my flock to remember that we are people of faith and not people of fear. And being people of faith doesn't mean that we are not people of head. We're head and heart. So my message to my people, and if you listen to some of the sermons over the last couple of weeks, it'll bear it out. I always say, listen, you've got to be taking care of yourself. You've got to be keeping your social distancing. You've got to be washing your hands. You've got to be doing all the things that our public health officials are telling us to do. But you also can't lose yourself in this. You can't lose sight of God and sight of the fact that we still believe that God has a plan and that God will, in the end, make things come out to be good. Now, that doesn't mean this is going to be easy, but God has never promised anybody an easy life. He's promised that he would be faithful throughout our lives. So I continue to tell my people, God is going to be faithful. We need to be faithful. We don't need to be anxious. We don't need to be worried. But anxiety and worry will creep up on us from time to time. But we have to remember that ultimately we are people of faith, not people of fear. And we rest in the peace of God, knowing that this too shall pass.
Thank you for that message. Before we wrap up, I want to take you back, Reverend Daryl, to pre-Reverend Daryl, to the year of 1992. Okay, little 90s trivia here.
Sure.
Okay, in the year of 92, I'm going to give you three of the top songs. Which one is more of a 90s classic? Are you ready?
I'm ready. Shoot.
You have End of the Road, Boys to Men, Jump, Criss Cross, I'm Too Sexy, Right Said Fred. Which one is more of a 92 classic, Reverend Daryl?
Oh, that is such a tough one because I'm Too Sexy is the most 90s song ever, but I don't know I would call it a classic, but it is absolutely, especially early 90s. We're talking 92. Like it is the picture of coming out of the go-go 80s into the 90s. It is without question the most 90s song ever. But if I had to say the classic 92 song, I'm going to go with End of the Road because it was the theme song to our prom. So
there you go.
It's going to have a special place in my heart because as we left Stuyvesant High School, we were all walking around going, it's the end of the road.
Love it. Love the answer.
For the 15th Street building, it was the end of the road. So
it was the end of the road.
The road.
One last question. Just, I was moved here and you talk about the services that your community is providing. If anyone is listening, I'm going to provide the website for your church, but why don't you just tell through the video the address of your church? Are people able to contribute to your church
Absolutely.
in order to give towards that? Okay, what's the address?
Absolutely. If you want to send a donation to my church, it is St. Paul Church in Oxon Hill, 6634 St. Barnabas Road, Oxon Hill, Maryland, and it's OXON, Hill, Maryland, 20745. But the easier way to contribute is to go to our website, www.stpauloxonhill.org, stpauloxonhill.org, and click on the giving tab, and it'll give you multiple ways that you can give. It has the church address there, but it also has digital giving. And if you'd like to support our work, we greatly appreciate it. It is, of course, tax deductible. But what I can tell you is that money that comes into our church goes into the ministry of our church. It goes into providing us with the ability to do things in the community and to do things to enrich people's lives spiritually. We live in a time where I just don't think you can make it if you don't believe something beyond what you see around you. And at St. Paul Church, we want people to have something to believe in, and we believe that that's God and his son, Jesus Christ. but we also believe that you have to believe in something. So out of what we believe is we do the work that we do, and we'd love your support.
Reverend Daryl, thank you for your time. Wishing all the best to you and your family and your congregation, and our prayers are with you.
Thank you, Rob. To you and your family as well. Thanks so much for your time.
Appreciate it.